a very formal welcome to this year's Global Economy Prize. It's the 21st edition of this award, and I'm very happy you are all here. First of all, I would like to thank the Kieler Streichquartett, the Kiel String Quartet, already on the move. Thank you for setting the mood for this festive evening. 10 years after the Brexit referendum, the questions it raised remain central. The future of open economies, international cooperation, and the resilience of liberal societies in a changing geopolitical and geo-economic environment. Samet Yilmaz already said a few things about that, and I'm very much looking forward to hear more of it. As every anniversary, this one also reminds us that time does not only pass, it also rearranges what we think we already understood. And I think the last 10 years have really been revealing in this context. This evening is hosted by the City of Kiel, with a kick-off outside, by the Chamber of Industry of Commerce of Schleswig-Holstein and the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. My name is Elisabeth Rathke, I'm Head of Outreach at the Institute. And now I'm very pleased to welcome our two remaining hosts on stage. First up is Moritz Schularick. He already said some words, but also for this formal stage now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elisabeth, and a warm welcome again from me. I'm Moritz Schularick. I'm the president of the Kiel Institute, and I'm extremely pleased and happy to see you all here. Many faces, many friends, I would say friends and family of Kiel in this wonderful location. And as you can see, we're trying a new format today, which I think is so far off to an extremely good start. I wanted to, of course, welcome again, and Sabine and Martin, you're going to get a lot of rounds of applauses tonight. So this is another one. Thanks for being here with us. And also from me, from us at the Institute, and I think I can also speak for the mayor, a very warm welcome to our cooperation partners at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to Knud Hansen and to Jörg Orlemann. Where's Jörg? Over here, these two gentlemen. Thanks, we're very honored to have this prize, give it out to you, and be in such a wonderful and close cooperation. Thank you for that. I'm going to skip the city because they've left, and we're going to go to the. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So tonight, you guessed it. It's almost to the day 10 years since the Brexit referendum. And first of all, how time has flown. It's, it doesn't feel 10 years ago, but it certainly has shaped the world around us in a very important way. And we have two people here today who are the laureates of the prize who have been very central figures in this. One is the Mrs. Europe, if I can say that, in these negotiations, and the other one is Sabine Weyand, obviously, and the other one from the British side, not an opponent, not someone who is not a big fan of Brexit, is Martin Wolf. So this is I think it's a very nice combination that we have here. And populism, the future of the open global economy, the future of international cooperation, the future of trade, are going to feature prominently throughout this evening. And with that, I think we have a very fitting and important theme today for our Global Economy Prize that, as Elisabeth mentioned, for the 21st time now, celebrates and honors people who have contributed to keeping the global economy open, stable, and the world prosperous. And despite there's nothing to celebrate about these 10 years, we want to carry forward the torch of free trade, keeping in mind the resilience needs that we have and the lessons that we've learned. And without much further ado, I'm very happy to hand over to Knud Hansen, who is the president of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce of Schleswig-Holstein and the president of the Kiel Chamber of Industry and Commerce. So two hats on your shoulders. Knud, please take over. Thank you very much.
So I hope I take the right hat on now. And I have a little speech for you to welcome you all, dear President of the Kiel Institute for World Economic, dear Moritz, Nice to be here with you together. And, well, dear Vice President of the City Council, yes, dear Constanze, our Lord Mayor is now gone, so you're the first in the round here in Kiel. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, and of course, dear Sabine Weyand, and of course, Martin Rolf as winner of the Global Economic Prize in 2026. It's a really great pleasure for me to welcome you here to Kiel and to the Kieler Week. Not just anywhere, but here at the Kieler Kaufmann, in the heart of the Kieler Week, because this is the place where the economy of the region meets regularly every month. And I think there's another reason which fits quite well to meet here in Kiel to celebrate these awards. Kiel has always looked outside to the sea, to the neighbors, and to the world. And of course, the Kieler Week is much more than just the biggest sailing event in the world. It is a week in which the city demonstrates what it defines. It's the openness to the world, it's great hospitality, hope so, and the confidence in international cooperations. And at this time, none of this can be taken for granted any longer. These values have taken a special significance. It is exactly in this spirit that tonight's event should be understood for, because the presentation of the World Economic Award stands precisely for this attitude and gives it visibility. The award has presented since 2005, we heard this again, from the Kiel Institute of the World Economy, the City of Kiel, and the Schleswig-Holstein Chamber of Commerce and Industry. More than 20 years, more than 20 award cycles. And whenever I look back at this list, it makes me a little bit proud and, to be honest, a little bit humble as well. Helmut Schmidt was among them, as were Ingvar Kamprad, Paul Krugman, and Mikhail Gorbachev. They couldn't hardly be more different. But one thing unites them. They all believe that personal responsibility and openness to the world are just two sides of the same medal. That free people and free markets need one another. And that this relationship must be defended again and again, against complacency and against fear. And these values, openness, rules-based trade, and democratic responsibility, remain the foundation of what all of us here depend upon today. And to say it a little bit more clearly, we all must take care that this foundation does not continue to crumble, that it remains stable. That, ladies and gentlemen, is more important today than ever before. And this year remarks, we heard about it, always, the 10th anniversary of the Brexit. I think it's not an anniversary to celebrate, but it's a good occasion to pause and to reflect. What does integration require? What is the cost when togetherness and community are lost? We usually continue and feel the answer a little bit later in supply chains, in custom declarations, and in investments that are no longer as easy as they once were. And both of tonight's award winners have engaged with precisely these questions, each in their own way and each with remarkable power and perseverance. For our 170,000 member companies of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry here in Schleswig-Holstein, open markets and reliable trading, rules are not abstract values. They are the foundation of our business. Schleswig-Holstein is an export-oriented state. From the maritime economy, the mechanical engineering to future industries such as energy and digitalization. And these companies all need reliability and partners with whom they can plan. Protectionism is not the answer for us, it is our problem. And at the same time, I see room for free movement becoming more and more narrow, piece by piece. Regulation, reporting obligations, approval procedures take longer time than the project behind them. 2 out of 3 our companies are dissatisfied with the economic policy framework. That's not complaining, that's a great signal. I worry that we are teaching entrepreneurs to not being entrepreneurial. I worry that personal responsibility and initiative may eventually give way to a kind, as I call it, managed and supervised economy, with forms instead of freedom. I think Ingvar Kamprad would probably not have founded IKEA today. Not because he wouldn't have this great idea of good designed and functional furniture affordable for many people as possible, but because of the ages of time it takes nowadays for the approval process. And at this time, the motivation for the project would probably have faded. As the president of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I therefore wish to make an urgent call. We need less bureaucracy. Not only fewer rules, but better ones. Rules that create reliability without suffocating entrepreneurship. Anyone who wants to start a business, anyone who wants to invest, or simply move his company forward should not spend half on his energy to paperwork. And this is precisely what the connection to tonight's award winners lies. The question of how good rules are negotiated, how they are defended, and how we explain why they matter. That is the life's work of both prize winners from we are about to honor tonight. Sabine Weyand joined the European Commission in 1994. And since then, her name has been associated with Europe's major trade negotiations, TTIP, CETA, then Brexit, 3 years as deputy chief negotiator. One of the most technically complex and politically charged negotiations the European Union has ever conducted. What distinguishes her from others, and what the jury rightly highlights, is a rare combination you have. She works behind the scenes. She knows every detail, and she never loses sight of the big picture. She held the European position together and kept 27 member states on the right course. That may sound unspectacular, but in negotiation of this kind, that is really what matters. When such negotiations fail, our member companies feel the consequences directly in supply chains, in export orders, or in planning horizons. When they succeed, it is usually because someone like Sabine Weyand was in the room doing the work and not stopping until the outcome was right. Thank you for that. And we have Martin Wolf around us. He has been chief economic commentator at the Financial Times since 1987. Nearly 4 decades of columns on the global economy. Through the Asian crisis, through the 2008 financial crisis, the Euro crisis, Brexit, a pandemic, and now a new era of trade conflicts and democratic erosion. His articles are read by finance ministers, central bankers, and business leaders all around the world. Not because he is always right, but because he thinks clearly. He writes clearly and is unafraid of unconformable conclusions. He grew up in London as son of 2 Jewish refugees, his father from Vienna, his mother from the Netherlands, who lost almost 30 relatives in the Holocaust. And he has written that this experience led him to economics, not as an academic exercise, but because he understood very early that economic failure is not merely a technical problem. It can destroy societies. That insight lies at the heart of his writing. And the central argument of his most recent book is that free markets and free societies belong together. They need one another. Nothing could fit better than today. And anyone who believes that relationship can be taken for granted is mistaken. It must be defended with arguments, with perseverance, and renewed effort again and again. As an entrepreneur myself and the president of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I fully subscribe to that view. Ladies and gentlemen, this connection between open markets, between stable institutions, and entrepreneurial freedom is not self-sustaining. It is the result of work, of negotiations, of intelligent people who never stop standing up for what is right. Sabine Weyand and Martin Wolf represent exactly that in their life. And I'm delighted that we can thank them for their work here in Kiel during the Kieler Week. I think it's the right place and it is the right evening. So let us use the opportunity to engage in conversation, to build new contacts and strengthen existing relationships. Because at the end, trust is not only created in negotiation rooms or in newspaper columns, but also and over again on good dinner and good meaningful conversation like tonight. Again, congratulations from my heart to our award winners, and thank you all very much to being with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen, for quite extensive overview already over our laureates tonight, and thank you, Moritz, as well. I think what became clear is that Brexit was not a single moment. It was the beginning of a long process of practical disentanglement, legal, economic, and institutional, often all at once. Our first laureate, Miss Europe, as Moritz introduced her, was at the center of shaping this process. And despite the fancy title, I think it became very clear it's not always a fancy job to do this. To honor her more, I would like to invite Rolf Langhammer to the stage with me. He's the former vice president of the Kiel Institute, and as I personally like to say, he's our Swiss Army knife for all issues trade at the Institute.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. This comparison I have never heard before. Well, ladies and gentlemen, dear Martin, above all, dear Sabine. In the history of the Global Economy Prize, so far 3 former EU commissioners got awarded. Nelly Cruz. Then, of course, Pascal Lamy, former boss of Sabine, and Mario Monti. There were, of course, commissioners. Now, for the first time, we are now honoring a former Director General in the operational center of policy making in what I call the Brussels Theater. And I asked myself, what makes the difference between a commissioner and a Director General? And I bring you in a world of sailing. I'm not a sailor, but I read much about sailing. And I see a skipper, a guest skipper, who is a commissioner, who has, of course, merits on many, many duty stations before. Nelly Cruz and Mario Monti were ministers, of course, in their country. But they don't know the boat so well. This is the job of a trimmer. The trimmer handles the sails. Of course, navigates through the seas and is very much aware of the limits of a boat. And as with institutions where conflicting targets, trade-offs, of course, can overload, overburden a boat, the institution, the same is, of course, with boats. So you need someone who is capable to see the limits of such a boat. And without a good, let's say, trimmer, a skipper would stray around like a Flying Dutchman. So I think this is very important. Now, what are the qualifications of such a trimmer? And that brings me to Sabine Weyand. You need at least 3 qualifications. One is competence. The second is experience. And the third, very important, endurance. So first go through the competence. Sabine studied economics, political science, linguistics, and British literature in universities like Tübingen, then moved to Cambridge, the UK, then to the talent pool of Europe, which is the Collège d'Europe, College of Europe in Bruges, and finally back to Freiburg. So during these times, of course, she acquired what you call the professional competence. And when she joined the Commission, of course, she had to learn experience. And she was very active in many, many duty stations within the Commission. We equate here sometimes with trade, but that is, of course, not sufficient. That is insufficient. She was a Sherpa, assisting the Sherpa, the EU Sherpa in G8, G7 meetings. She was working inside the European Union, for instance, in smoothing the relations between the trilogue, between the Parliament, the Commission, and the Ministerial Council. And I could imagine, given the heterogeneity and the conflicting interests between these 3 institutions, this was far away from a cakewalk. Then, of course, she was in the completion of a single market. So would you name an issue? I would say, yes, it was on her desk. Industry, energy, fishery, agriculture, what have you. Of course, you name it. Everything was on her desk. And finally, of course, she came 7 years ago, I think, into the leading position as the Director General in trade. So everybody would say, okay, trade. It's bread and butter, it's tariffs, tariff cutting and removal of non-tariff barriers. This is not sufficient, by no means. Trade agreements today are extremely deep. They handle issues like, for instance, regulatory cooperation, a very important issue. They handle, of course, sustainability issues, intellectual property rights protection. They handle human rights, civil society, and so on and so on. So many different issues. And of course, this is absolutely vital to keep an eye on these different balloons, of course, before we explode. And this is what Sabine did, of course. In this respect, she was, of course, developing skills in negotiations, which, of course, also come back from her long time working in the Commission. Let's say the art of negotiations is hers. the art of a deal is not necessarily hers, and I will come to that later in a minute. So I was told she can be, let's say, hard-nosed. She can reciprocate if someone plays hardball. And it remembers, of course, I'm a Billy Joel fan, and there is a song, Billy Joel, on a tough woman, and there's one phrase, oh, she never gives out and she never gives in. And I think that could be something that could be equated to Sabine Weyand. So this is the experience style. And now coming to endurance. Negotiating in the European Union is a long-distance sailing. Winds can change, there can be shocks, abrupt changes, of course, delays, postponements, shocks, and so on and so on. Imagine in 1999, when Sabine Weyand joined the cabinet of Pascal Lamy in trade, it was not yet, let's say, the job with Mercosur, but Mercosur negotiations started in 1999, so 20 years later, 2019, these negotiations were officially concluded and took another 7 years to come to signing, and you know it's not yet over because the European Court of Justice has still something to say. So for a quarter of a century, I think, this issue, Mercosur, never disappeared from the desk of Sabine Weyand. This is what I call long distance, right? And of course, there are other issues as well. So both, of course, experience and endurance, of course, leads us to what I would call three major events, two major events and one issue for Sabine Weyand. The first event, mentioned already, Brexit. It was a shock, of course, and there's nothing to celebrate, we talked about already. But, of course, you got the thorny task in a very special situation or scenario of divorce. There's one partner who wants to be divorced at any cost, and there's another partner who wants to be not to be divorced at all. So how can you compromise between the two? Sabine Weyand had to defend European interests, to minimize the costs incurred upon the European Union by this decision. At the same time, of course, keep the door open to maybe a re-entry future. Of course, not, of course, to come to, let's say, a confrontation with the British. And of course, these are extremely complex negotiations. Just mentioned two. One is fishery. One was, of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol. So only two issues. And of course, she had to master all these things. So this was the one event. And she made it, of course, I think, fairly well. The milk is split, or is milk spilled, of course. It is done, and we are now looking forward, maybe because of security reasons, to a better future between the UK and the European Union. But of course, there's another issue and another event. I will be very brief on that, the Turnberry deal. If someone should not have an idea what the difference is between a deal and a negotiation, Sabine Weyand made that crystal clear. And with, let's say, non-verbal signaling or body language, look at some photos, you also see what her idea was about that deal. Yes. Okay, negotiating with the US from the chicken war via the Blair House Agreement to TTIP and so on were always not a cakewalk, but a deal is really very something special. Now, the final point is the issue. And one issue which is really very important for Sabine is to reconcile free trade with protecting the environment. And years ago, she had an article recommended two instruments which the European Union has, CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, on the one hand, and the emission trading system on the other hand. But again, as in sailing, we see headwinds for all the two. There are delays, there's strong pressure to delay, to postpone, to water down, to dilute these two instruments, and we'll see what happens then. Now, Sabine Weyand has a new job. Maybe she's now her own trimmer and skipper, because this is maybe a very smaller boat. She will be a special advisor, bringing us, of course, to strategic partnerships which we badly need in a world of two bullies trying to split the Union. When I had to summarize that all, it reminded me of something which has been said, nobody knows exactly who it was, some decades ago. It was attributed to Henry Kissinger. He should have said, and he denied it to have said it, if I would have to call Europe, which number should I dial? And he had no answer. But I have an answer. Yes? Without any hesitation, I would dial Sabine Weyand's number as a devoted European. Yeah? And therefore, it is my great pleasure to award the Global Economy Prize to Sabine Weyand, Special Advisor for Strategic Partnerships, European Commission. My congratulations, Sabine, and perhaps you came up.
Lady Sabine. Mach das ruhig zu dritt.
Sabine, come here. Congratulations. Let's go. And thank you, Rolf, for the wonderful response. Here we go.
Thank you very much. Oops. I have to lower this a bit. I think I'm. Or maybe I take this one indeed. Sorry.
You can take this.
Now I can take this one in my hand. Thank you very much. I am deeply honored to be awarded this World Economy Prize, and I'm deeply humbled listening to the very much exaggerated laudatio from Rolf Langhammer, but also the kind words from Knud Hansen. I know nothing about sailing. Now, I learned there is a trimmer on the ship. I shouldn't admit to that, so you see my diplomatic qualities are limited. I shouldn't admit to that in Kiel, but it's true. But there's one thing that is important, and that is, on a boat, you need a team, and everyone needs to pull together. And that is the same in politics and in the civil service. So all the achievements you have recognized, they are not the result of the work of one person. They are the result of a work of a team of colleagues that trust each other, that pull together. And if I've been able to make a contribution to steering the contribution of many people towards a common purpose, then I'm very proud of that. But I'm also deeply aware that my role in this has been limited. So I accept this prize also on behalf of the people with whom I've been working on this. I am particularly proud to receive this prize from the Kiel Institute, an institution that has always stood for academic excellence, for rigorous analysis, open intellectual debate, and international cooperation. Very much the values I have tried to promote in my job so far. And I'm very happy that I had the opportunity this afternoon to meet some of your teams, and I'm looking forward to continuing these exchanges, because I will also, in addition to being an advisor on European strategic partnerships, I will also work with the European University Institute. So I'm moving closer to academia again, which is for me a return to an old love. So I'm looking forward to being able to work with the colleagues here at the Institute. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am really very much humbled by having this award. There has been a lot of talk about Brexit already, and I imagine that Martin Wolf has a word or two to say about that as well. No, he doesn't. But can I just say one thing? I mean, yes, my role has been in that enterprise to keep the European Union together, because 10 years ago, there was the fear that this could lead to the disintegration of the whole European Union. But at the same time, we were also very much aware that organizing an orderly withdrawal of the UK from the EU was a prerequisite for a constructive future partnership. And in today's world, we need that more than ever. So this is one of the strategic partnerships I hope to see develop in the future. Thank you very much again to the jury and to all of you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabine Weyand, for your kind words. Really appreciate them. And maybe just a brief word of context from my side. We're all aware, we already heard this evening, that Sabine is in transition between jobs. She just changed from one job to the other and has taken on a new professional responsibility. She just said it. So in light of this transition, she decided to not talk too much in depth about international trade or topics surrounding this evening, but she already had a background conversation with our teams, and she agreed to join us at one of our upcoming events. So we're very happy that we will continue this conversation with her in the future. So thank you very much. For the second part of the evening, we'll turn from practice to interpretation, from policy to analysis. Few have described the dynamics of globalization and its political consequences as consistently as Martin Wolf. And few have kept the link between open markets and open societies at the center of the debate for so long. Now I would like to invite Moritz back to the stage because he also has some words to say.
Dear, this is on. Dear Martin, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a very special honor as well for me to deliver short, because we're all eager to hear from Martin and his take on the world right now, this short laudatory address. As I have the privilege of honoring I crossed this out, the most influential economic commentator of our time, a man who has really has shaped the global economy and the discourse about it for decades. And I know, Martin, that recently you were on stage, received an award from no one else than the King of Spain. I'm not pretending that I'm like on that level of anything, but then, I've asked myself, what does the King of Spain know about economics? And probably, not that much. So in some way, this prize today from the Kiel Institute should count as much, at least, even if we're not quite on that level of aristocratic seniority. Martin Wolf has been part of my intellectual life for as long as I can remember. My first interaction, I'm 100% sure Martin does not remember that, was when dates back to February 2009. I was a very young assistant professor in Berlin, visiting Cambridge University at the time, and I was convinced that I had discovered something really important. And it was so important that I thought it had to get out in the world, and so I wrote to Martin and asking him to publish a short piece in on his blog, The Economist Forum. At the time, there was time of the financial crisis, one of the, if not the leading, platform of exchange. So I wrote the following email. Dear Mr. Wolf, I would like to submit the attached manuscript, Reserve Accumulation and Global Financial Instability, for consideration for publication on your blog. In this short piece, I argue that over the past decade, China and other emerging markets accumulated foreign currency reserves to ensure against the risk of financial globalization. Yet large capital outflows from emerging markets have themselves contributed to macroeconomic imbalances and the mispricing of financial risks. Thank you for your consideration. Best regards, Moritz Schularick. Martin swiftly replied, thanks. I will look at it. I'm sure you're aware that I've published a book on this theme. Martin Wolf. This sums it up well. Martin was ahead of me, ahead of most of us, and he stayed ahead of us, not just back then. But at least you get the wrong impression here. There's an enormous kindness in Martin and an openness with which he replied, opened the door, and eventually actually my little blog got published on the most important platform for global economic debate at the time. For a young assistant professor at the time, that was quite something. Martin has stood at the center of the international economic policy debate for many years, decades, with impressive clarity, analytical sharpness, and intellectual integrity. He, like almost on a daily basis, it feels, succeeds in making complicated economic relationships understandable without ever oversimplifying them. And if there's one thing that we try to also communicate to our PhD students, I'm very happy that many of them are here today in our advanced studies program, is that communication, the science is one, the academic side is one, but the communication into the policy sphere is equally important, and getting that combination right, Martin is an impressive figure and a role model for all of us. Martin seeks truth, and he believes in the search of it. And more often than not, he actually provides it. In complicated matters such as the global economy, global imbalances, or fiscal policy, we do need the voices that provide guidance, voices that not only analyze but explain, that not only comment but enable us to see more clearly the links and connections between the things and dossiers, as they would say in the European world. Voices that enlighten, and I think Martin Wolf is precisely such an enlightenment character. The quality that stands out for me personally most is judgment. And it's something that's hard to teach, and it might be the one asset we humans have in the face of the AI revolution that saves us, namely judgment. Martin has the analytical judgment to separate the noise from the signal, the judgment to rank what truly matters, and the gift to clearly communicate what he judges to be important. He identifies the important questions, and without touching too much on the Brexit debate, it's nothing to celebrate, but it's clear that Brexit marked a profound rupture in trade and political integration in Europe, the moment where populism and economic nationalism truly landed in Europe. Brexit made Britain poorer, and in many ways it made Europe poorer too. And populism, how it didn't solve any problems, but it created even more. It's as has been said before, it's the bad economics of populism make for even worse politics down the road. And today's dinner and Preis celebration falls on the day where we are likely to get the 7th UK Prime Minister in 10 years since the Brexit referendum. That tells you something about what's happening. Martin had a firm-eyed and clear stance on the consequences of Brexit and was voiced in numerous columns and podcasts, and the depth and analytic acuity, as well as the clarity of his commentary, meant that the eyes of observers across Europe were not only fixated on what Sabine and the teams at the negotiation table were doing, it was also how would Martin judge what was going on. What were the events unfolding in his country? So the columns were part and parcel of that process. Let me conclude by saying that Martin viewed, and I think continues to view, Brexit not merely as a misguided economic policy decision, but as a symptom of a much deeper malaise, and I'm sure we're going to hear something about that today. The malaise of populism, of unrealistic promises, and the refusal to acknowledge economic realities. It's something that we in this country are also guilty of. It is a symptom of what Martin Wolf calls the crisis of democratic capitalism. He was among the first to recognize the deep significance of that populist turn of Western democracies, and if I may say so, I'm afraid it's far from over. Against the populist tide, Martin defends the open society, international cooperation, and the benefits of global markets without ever ignoring their weaknesses, and I think that's important if we want to make progress. We have to be aware of where we went wrong. Martin argues passionately, but never ideologically, and so he embodies something, and I know Martin, hopefully, I think he will appreciate this, he embodies what John Maynard Keynes, another great economist and formidable writer as well, said of our discipline of economics, namely that economics, quote Keynes, economics is a method rather than a doctrine. It's an apparatus of the mind, a technique of thinking, which helps its processor to draw correct conclusions. Dear Martin, over decades you've demonstrated how journalism can function at its best, independent, well-informed, critical, and always committed to the public interest. For this extraordinary achievement, for your intellectual leadership, and for your tireless commitment to an informed debate on economics and economic policy, you deserve our deepest respect and our highest recognition. It is therefore a great pleasure for me to present you with the 2026 Global Economy Prize today. Congratulations. congratulations, Martin. I'm not the King of Spain, but it'll do. I'll take this away. The floor is yours.
Can we get this a little bit down? Okay, does the sound all right? Yes? The only technical problem you have is you assumed I was going to be of the height of a German. But there are always these little disappointments. So as long as you can hear me, you don't need to see me. Not important. So, dear Knud, Rolf, and Moritz, these are extraordinary speeches I've heard, and I have absolutely no intention of living up to any of the expectations created by what you've said. Before I start, I thought I'd mention that I have been here quite a few times before. In the 1980s, when the Institute was run by the very formidable Herbert Giersch, whom I remember with great admiration and respect for the clarity of his views, his passionate belief in the importance of Schumpeter, and his devotion to an open and internationally open society and a domestically open society. So it's a great honor and pleasure to be here, partly because of those memories and partly because, of course, of what the Kiel Institute represents. The justification for giving me this exceptional honor has to be that you consider what I do important. By honoring me, you honor the role played by independent commentary and free media in a democratic society. In doing that, you bring honor not only upon me, but I think also upon yourselves. Almost everything that was said about me was right. Some of it even a little exaggerated. But I have to insist on one small point. I am always right. Not quite true, as you will about to discover. Not quite true. I admit at least occasionally to my wife that I'm wrong. Now, my personal history makes this, as has already been indicated, a particularly moving experience for me. My parents were refugees from Hitler's Europe, my father from Austria, my mother from the Netherlands, as has been mentioned. They met in London in 1942, married in 1943, and had me in 1946. Yes, I am that old. But I haven't done my job, by the way, since 87. I've done this job for 30 years, which many people would say is quite long enough. Now, my parents could never have met, and I would never have been born without the Second World War. But I also always remember that I am not just a child of that disaster. I'm a child of European civilization, that of cultured Vienna, bourgeois Holland, liberal Britain, and needless to say, European Jewry, all together. And that's not all. I am completely a European. And I share the post-war ideal of European integration. And I consider this to have been built on three main elements. Repudiation of the nationalism that turned Europe into a charnel house. Rejection of the totalitarian ideologies, which spawned here, alas, which at best deprived the peoples of Europe of their liberty and at worst created a hellscape of concentration and death camps. And as a result of that, and this is my theme tonight, the embrace of the great ideals of democracy, freedom, personal and political, and cross-border cooperation. And guided by these ideas and ideals, I'm very happy to say here that the post-war history of Germany has been a miracle of reform, recovery, and rehabilitation, But here, just as in all the other main liberal democracies, they are being challenged. And I started writing my work, as has been mentioned, on the crisis of democratic capitalism in response to two such events, Brexit and the election of Donald Trump as president, which I'm going to come to in a moment, in 2016. And it is there in the US that we find this most startlingly true. Erstwhile bastion of democracy, founder of the liberal post-Second World War order, and this continent's guarantor during the Cold War, how far has it fallen? And how different the world looked just 35 years ago. The prosperity and freedom of the West had just so few years ago proved irresistible to the imprisoned, oppressed, and impoverished subjects of Soviet communism. The collapse of the Soviet Empire in Europe was quite extraordinarily a peaceful triumph. Liberal democracy, the liberal world order, a united West, and the EU itself appeared to have emerged triumphant from the catastrophes, crises, and conflicts of the 20th century. But these victories have, alas, not endured as we expected. And here is a list of some of the developments that have shaken the democratic world and its confidence in itself, when after it had believed itself so triumphant. So we've had a series of huge shocks. The financial crisis of 2007 to 9, the Eurozone crisis, the attack on Ukraine by an ever more autocratic Russia, and now wars in the Middle East. Growing dissatisfaction in important segments of our societies with the outcomes of globalization, including mass migration. Crucially, the arrival of China as a mercantilist, autocratic, and yet economically dynamic superpower with chokeholds over crucial inputs. The rise of populist and autocratic nationalism, notably Trump's MAGA movement, but also in the shock of Brexit, and the rising appeal of similar ideas and attitudes in parts of Europe. The economic and so also fiscal squeezes generated by aging and slowing growth, particularly in Europe. The pronounced US hostility, shocking to me, and I suspect everyone else here, towards the EU and NATO, and shown by the truly astonishing fact that Trump's US clearly feels closer to Putin's Russia and did to Viktor Orban's Hungary than to Volodymyr Zelensky's Ukraine. How far have they fallen? The demolition of the rules-governed trade order after the tariff war launched by Donald Trump. And now we face the unsettling threat of artificial intelligence, a radical new technology in whose development Europe plays, alas, little part, except as a regulator. And finally, as a result, and linked with all these things, the retreat of democracy, and especially its liberal form, democracy that is characterized by the rule of law, free speech, and political and civil rights. The retreat of this across much of the world. According to VDEM's 2026 report, the proportion of the world's population living in such states has collapsed from 17% in 2005 to just 7% now, almost all of them, of course, in Europe. Today, then, is, alas, a time of deep crisis, utterly unexpected a few decades ago, not just for the values my parents held and I absorbed, but also for the Bundesrepublik, the EU, and what we think of as modern Western civilization. So in my limited time, I'm going to grab 5 minutes extra because you went on a bit in the introductions. So dinner will be just a fraction later. In my limited time, I wish to consider the following themes. First, though some have touched on it, how I analyzed the remarkably recent arrival of democracy, its fragility, and the democratic recession we are clearly now in. in my book, The Crisis of Democratic Capitalism. Second, what I now think I missed in that analysis, the problems I understated. Third, how a serious analysis of our emerging polycrisis has to integrate economic, social, political, and cultural aspects of human behavior. Fourth, how are we somehow to manage our way out of our crisis? And finally, what all this means specifically for Europe. I know it's a little much, but I think it's quite important. So what I argued in my book, humans are social animals, but we are far more than just that. We use language, create and transmit culture, invent technologies. With these capabilities, we have been able to take over the planet. A necessary feature of our culture is politics. One of the great mistakes, in my view, of some extreme liberal thinkers is the idea that somehow politics can be abolished. It can't, but it must be contained and managed for the benefit of humanity. Of course, its purpose is to allow groups of humans to act together. The shift from hunter-gatherer to agrarian societies coincided with a political shift from family bands via tribal societies to complex social hierarchies, at the top of which almost always sat god kings or priest kings. As Walter Scheidel, a really great German historian living in the US, I think, has argued, such societies were often as unequal as they could possibly be. They functioned, but they were extraordinarily predatory. Among the rare exceptions to this rule were the great republics of the ancient world, often characterized by a crucial element, citizen mobilization for military service. But universal suffrage democracies of the kinds we have created in the last 100 years did not exist. Even republics were not only very rare, but had highly restricted suffrages. So basically, 2 centuries ago, there were no democracies, and there never had been. 20 years ago, there were many. So why did that happen? The answer, I think, is that it's hardly original to me, but it's crucial to understand how precious and rare this is. The answer is that a few European societies in their colonial offshoots developed ideals of private property, the rule of law, free competition, freedom of thought, the scientific revolution, representative institutions, and limited government. Today's democratic capitalism, the two sides of our economic and political organization, is directly the child of those ideas. In my book, I argue that these created a fruitful marriage between complementary opposites. And by the way, my experience of marriage, 55 years, is they are always marriages of complementary opposites. Complementary because capitalism and democracy both rest on exactly what I've listed: the rule of law, equality of status, fundamental status, which is not the same as material position, and freedom of individual action. But they're also opposites, because capitalism is liable to generate huge inequalities, not of wealth, but of private power, which threaten democracy. And democracy is liable to generate, by mistake, but that's what populism is about, huge concentrations of political power, which threaten capitalism. And if anybody doesn't see that around them now, they're just not paying attention. The capitalist and then the industrial revolutions induced revolutionary, transformative economic, technological, and social changes that favored the creation of an organized working class, an educated population, absolutely crucial, and not unrelated to those developments, a demand, a legitimate demand for an extension of political voice. The full mobilization of the adult population for war, including, of course, women, helped these transformations. It makes me very distressed to think that war played that role, but it did. After many conflicts, revolutions, and counter-revolutions, contemporary democratic capitalism emerged. The idea, basically, just in the first 30 or 40 years of the last century. The outcome after World War II has been the happiest and most prosperous societies in human history. We have all the evidence for that on both sides, both the prosperity and the relative happiness. So why now do we see the democratic depression or recession? The general reason is this marriage is always fragile, as I've indicated. It involves a relationship between complementary opposites. The specific reasons were, in my view, as in the 1920s and 2030s, and as has already been mentioned, economic, technological, and social. Among the economic reasons were the impact of deindustrialization, largely but not entirely inescapable, the impact of globalization and rising inequality. Among the technological reasons were the digital revolution, the associated media revolution, and the disappearance of the gatekeepers on information. Among the social revolutions were the rise of multicultural and multi-ethnic societies, and to some degree, the gender revolution, to which, alas, a very large proportion of men seem to find it very difficult to adjust. All these things created a backlash, and that backlash is central to contemporary right-wing populism. But a crucial cause of that backlash, I argue in my book, were the global and Eurozone financial crisis and subsequent slow growth, very important in the UK, and of course exacerbated by the onset of aging in our societies. Together, these developments have, I argued in my book, made capitalists appear incompetent and predatory, and public institutions appear corrupt and ineffective, and new media make it incredibly easy to make those charges effective. The demand for protectors of the people against these despised elites rose once again, as Plato forewarned in the Republic. It isn't new, it's just bigger. Trump was among the first of these to emerge, and I wrote a column in March 2016 under the heading, "Donald Trump embodies how great republics meet their end," which I think was pretty prescient. This made a comparison with the death of the Roman Republic more than 2,000 years ago. So what didn't I get right in this analysis? I now believe that I understated the impact of the business model of social media, built on exploiting and exacerbating the spread of ill-informed rage. Huge businesses, I've had some direct experience of this recently, now profit immensely from the destruction of the public goods of trust and reliable information. I have always accepted Marx's, I think, pretty brilliant view, whatever you think of Marxism, that technology ultimately drives the economy, social order, and political ideology. I did not understand how quickly it might do so with modern technologies. My related mistake was to miss the extent to which loyalty to a party chieftain could once again, as before, allow a man like Trump to define what was true for his followers. Führerprinzip, in other words. And that's exactly what happened after the claims he made that the 2020 election was stolen. It is impossible to stand for office in the United States today for the Republican Party without agreeing with Donald Trump on the lie that he won the 2020 election. This is not a trivial matter. It goes to the heart of the legitimacy of America, of democracy in the most important democracy in the world. And that's why the US is clearly in the grips of a fully fledged constitutional and cultural counter-revolutionary crisis. Now, I would like to go on to suggest, and I'll try and do this relatively briefly, that we need to broaden our analysis further. We have arrived at a complex cultural, political, social, and economic crisis. We should add to this a global environmental crisis, and some people call this a polycrisis. Do we have the tools intellectually to think well about such a crisis? And I'm going to argue here as a challenge to the PhDs here, other scholars who are younger, who are young and beginning their lives, that we don't. I love economics. It offers wonderful tools for understanding the role of incentives in shaping a wide range of human behavior. Above all, the evolutionary priority of humanity, as is true for all animals, is to capture enough resources for us to survive and procreate. Humanity's success shows the extraordinary strength of our economic institutions, because this is the economic challenge that we are trying to solve. But we always have to remember that our ability as humans to solve the economic problem, as I've analyzed it, depends on a panoply of institutions, social arrangements, and cultural values that allow us to cooperate, innovate, and pass our innovations down the generations. Unfortunately, in my view, our intellectual silos make it hard to understand, and that affects policy, how these complex aspects of human societies interact. Let me just take two examples. When economists discuss the impact of a huge rise in imports on society, they largely did so, if they did so at all, in terms of the need to compensate losers for the loss of their incomes. This ignored the impact on communities, social organizations, the upbringing of children, trust in business and political leaders, and so on and so forth. This is why we did not understand that many people, very important in Britain, had come to feel that the social contract itself was being torn up in favor of predatory domestic elites and hostile foreigners. And it was a reality for which we as economists were, and I think mostly remain, intellectually and morally unprepared. Our scope is simply too narrow. My own view is the natural sciences are in better intellectual state because the subjects lie naturally on top of each other. Chemistry on top of physics, organic chemistry on top of chemistry, and so forth. This is not true for the social sciences. You could imagine a way of structuring social science in which they lie one on top of the other. I'm not going to discuss that here. But it's obvious if you focus only on the economic aspects of human society, you will necessarily ignore all the other aspects of human society that integrate with them. So my big intellectual point I want to make here is we must always remember that in the social life of humans, everything is connected to everything else. It is a great mistake to ignore it, even if that makes the job of understanding what is going on in the world even harder than we'd wish it could be. But what makes it hard is reality, and I think we economists, and I'm very much one of them, made a big mistake in ignoring the significance of this. And I hope future generations will begin to try and recreate the sort of idea of society as a whole in its moral, ethical, social, political aspects, which is so obvious a characteristic, for example, of the work of Adam Smith. We have, I think, declined rather than advanced. I won't go further. The man who made me most realize this, interestingly, is Joseph Schumpeter, whom I've already mentioned, whose history of economic analysis is a masterpiece in discussing these issues. Now let me move to a couple of final issues before I conclude. How do we escape from the crisis of democratic capitalism? I have come to the view that the right way for us to preserve the blessings of freedom and democracy is to take quite a Catholic approach. We have to do quite a few things at the same time, none of them easy and some of them possibly impossible. Citizenship is the core idea of liberal democracy. It involves notions of equality, participation, obligations, rights, and mutual protection. Citizenship as an ideal is active. This has to be the starting point. What do we owe citizens? But also what should we expect from them? And what do they owe us in return? Economic, social, and political institutions the substance and structure of civilizations, of education, and such vexed issues as migration, the legitimacy of international institutions, are all involved in and affect this idea of citizenship. So my core idea in the book is it's through this lens, national and European and global, that we must reconstruct the sort of active state and society we want. Let me just consider a few of the issues that arise. I won't discuss all of them here. First, education. My dear friend, the late Jan Tumlea, who was chief economist at the GATT and died in 1986, used to tell me that it is not true that we don't learn from history. First we learn, and then we forget. So my most important point is, if we wish to retain democracy, freedom, and so forth, we have to do a better job than we have been doing of teaching our children. Because in most countries, perhaps not in Germany, they never taught about this at all. They know absolutely nothing about our political system, how it works, and what its underlying values are. And then the second thing I'd just like to is we need to think about how technologies and new competitors affect our economies, not to stop change, but to make clear to ourselves what are the crucial borders beyond which they cannot be allowed to go. And I think, and I've written about this very extensively, this is most obvious now in the case of artificial intelligence. We can't just let it happen to us the way social media did. The consequences are too drastic. And the third and last point, though I don't have to, can't go, sorry, third and there's one more point, is we need to consider the renewal of political institutions. We fossilized liberal democracy in the early part of the 20th century, and I think there are many ways it might be improved. And finally, we have to recognize that however much we wish to protect our fragile and threatened democracies, we must also, as I've already said, be able to cooperate with societies and states different from our own. China is partly an enemy, but it is also a partner in a common process. And what does this all mean for Europe? The purpose of a prophet of doom is to persuade people to change their ways. And I'm today, and in some of my recent writings, a bit of a prophet of doom. So we must change our ways. Democracy, Churchill said, is the worst possible system apart from all the others that have been tried from time to time. And that's absolutely right. It gives us the inestimable blessing of personal freedom and the ability to change governments peacefully. And so far as we know, these are, as I've mentioned, the most successful societies in history. But the confidence in them is sliding. And the result, and that is particularly true in the US, the great guarantor of the civilization we've been living in. So destiny itself is thrusting greatness upon the EU, as Shakespeare would have said. The latter has many challenges to meet on security, sustaining Ukraine, technological innovation, completion of the single market, and working successfully with others in the world. It is daunting, but if you can stick together, maybe the departure of Britain makes that a bit easier, the EU could achieve a great deal. Indeed, it has become, in my view, the indispensable foundation of a hope for renewal of the great liberal democratic project of our age. All these virtues that are essential for the survival and flourishing across the world of what has been achieved have to be renewed generation after generation. How we act now is ultimately an expression of who we decide we are. So who are we now? The next decade is likely to answer that question, perhaps decisively. And if I ever come back, I promise I will give you a much more cheerful speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin Wolf, for your speech. And despite your limited time, I'm pretty sure you took some liberties within these limits. But despite your limited time, I think we all heard a lot of valuable reflection from your side and a lot of food for thought for the rest of the evening. So on behalf of the organizers, I would sincerely thank you to all laureates, speakers, and contributors to this evening's ceremony. In the beginning of the evening, we heard a lot about the good cooperation between the Institute, the Chamber for Commerce and Industry, and the City of Kiel. I can only emphasize that it's also like this behind the scenes, so I would sincerely thank all of the organizers who came together for this evening like weeks before. So thank you to the teams behind the scene. And of course, I would like again thank our Kieler Streichquartett who set the right mood for this evening with Nora Pieske and Anne Schneider on the violin, Sarah Papa on the viola, and Volker Bonsack on the violoncello. And that was the right keyword, because with one final musical piece of the evening, we would all like to leave you for dinner and great conversations for the evening to continue. Thank you all for being here.